Hi, everyone. Welcome back to the podcast. So picture this. You are standing in a crowded room. You've got this lukewarm cup of coffee in your hand, and someone you have literally never met before walks right up, extends a hand, and says, "Tell me about yourself."
The classic nightmare scenario.
Right. I mean, in your native language, you don't even blink. You seamlessly weave together, your job, where you grew up. Maybe you throw in a little self-deprecating joke about the weather, and then you bat the conversational ball right back to them. You are, an articulate, complex, three-dimensional adult.
Exactly. It's just effortless.
But now, imagine that exact same scenario, holding that exact same cup of coffee, but the question is asked in English, a language you're still, actively learning.
That's where everything changes.
Suddenly, it is like you have entirely forgotten who you are. The whole intricate tapestry of your life is just reduced to this terrifying blank screen. You know your story, your dreams, your professional background, but the absolute second you try to translate your identity, your brain just flatlines.
It really does. It is this universally shared nightmare for language learners. And, the deepest irony here is that it happens with the one subject you are undeniably the world's leading expert on, which is yourself.
Right. You'd think it would be the easiest topic in the world.
You would. But what is actually happening in that moment of absolute panic isn't a failure of vocabulary. Not at all. It is a massive systemic failure of working memory.
Okay, wait, working memory. Break that down a bit.
Yeah, so we are dealing with a phenomenon known in cognitive psychology as dual task interference.
Oh, wow. Sounds intense.
It is, actually. See, in your native language, a self-introduction is basically an automated motor program. You aren't consciously selecting verbs or, worrying about syntax. You are just deciding how you want to present yourself to this specific person.
Right. You're just reading the vibe.
Yeah. Exactly. But in a second language, your prefrontal cortex is suddenly trying to do two incredibly demanding tasks simultaneously. You are trying to read the social dynamics of the room, which is hard enough, while frantically scanning a mental dictionary, policing your own grammar, and, probably worrying about your accent.
So the system just completely overloads.
It overloads, and the result is that classic deer-in-the-headlights freeze.
I think, honestly, the most frustrating part of that freeze is the regression. Because you are, let's say, a senior engineer or marketing director, or someone who holds deep philosophical conversations at dinner parties back in your home country.
Oh, totally. You have a rich inner life.
Yes, but when you open your mouth in English, you feel like you are speaking at the level of a toddler. I like apples, my car is blue. It is just a profound blow to the ego.
It's humiliating for a lot of people.
It really is. Yeah. And so the mission of our deep dive today into this source material is to completely dismantle that anxiety. We are not here to hand you a static, rigid script for you to memorize and just recite like a hostage reading demands.
Which, ironically, is the default survival tactic for almost everyone.
It really is, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, when faced with the cognitive overload we just talked about, the human brain desperately seeks safety. And in language learning, safety usually looks like a meticulously memorized paragraph.
Ah, yes. The bedroom monologue.
Exactly. A learner will sit at their desk in the absolute safety of their bedroom. They'll write out this flawless 10-sentence monologue packed with highly advanced vocabulary.
They practice it in the mirror until it sounds like a TED Talk.
Right, and they just assume they are totally ready for a networking event.
But it is essentially the linguistic equivalent of building a magnificent house of cards. I mean, I see people do this all the time. They construct this incredibly elaborate, towering structure of words.
And it looks so impressive at first.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
They deploy it at a conference, and for the first, 30 seconds, it looks brilliant. They sound like a native speaker. But a house of cards requires absolute stillness to survive, right?
Yes, and conversations are never still.
Never. They are messy, unpredictable, super dynamic environments. The moment the person they are talking to smiles and interrupts with a slightly unexpected question, maybe asking about some tiny detail they just mentioned, somebody basically just opened a window.
A gust of wind comes in.
Exactly. A gust of wind comes in, and that beautiful towering house of cards completely shatters.
Because memorization creates a highly, highly brittle neural pathway. You have to think of it like a train on a track. The speaker is just chugging along from sentence 2 to sentence 3.
So what happens if they get derailed?
Well, if the listener interrupts them, essentially knocking that train off the track, the speaker's brain doesn't have the agility to just skip to sentence 5 or pivot to a new topic. They are entirely reliant on that rigid sequence they built in isolation.
That makes so much sense. When you memorize a script, you are preparing for a monologue.
Right, but human connection fundamentally requires a dialogue. The philosophy we really need to adopt here is that sounding comfortable and adaptable is infinitely more valuable than sounding linguistically impressive.
I want to zoom in on that specific idea of sounding comfortable, because there is this tiny microscopic example from the text that completely changed how I view beginner language lessons. Let's look at literally the absolute first thing that comes out of your mouth, which is your name.
Oh, this is such a great example.
Most traditional textbooks, like the ones we all grew up with, will teach you the phrase, "My name is Carlos." But if you actually listen to how people interact in the real world, you almost always hear, "I'm Carlos."
Yeah, almost exclusively.
Both are grammatically flawless.
Yeah.
But why is "I'm Carlos" so much more effective when you are genuinely trying to establish a connection?
Well, it really comes down to pragmatics and those subtle social cues we transmit through rhythm. "I'm Carlos" utilizes a contraction. And in English, native speakers use contractions constantly, not because they are lazy, which is a big myth, but because contractions smooth out the rhythm of speech.
To make it bounce a little more.
Exactly. They signal a casual, highly accessible tone. When you walk up to someone and deliver this heavily enunciated, rigid, "My name is Carlos," it requires more syllables. It completely lacks that natural conversational bounce, and subconsciously, it actually signals a slight social distance.
It sounds so formal, almost like you are, checking into a hotel or reading a legal deposition.
Yes, it feels like you are wearing a tuxedo to a beach party.
Oh, that's a perfect way to put it.
Yeah.
You are dressed perfectly, but you just do not fit the vibe of the room at all.
That is exactly it. Furthermore, just from a purely cognitive standpoint, "I'm Carlos" requires way less bandwidth. It is short, punchy, and incredibly easy to say with confidence.
And confidence is key there.
Absolutely. When a learner successfully delivers that short phrase with a relaxed posture and a smile, they immediately establish themselves as a comfortable communicator. The listener's brain registers the comfort, not the complexity of the grammar. The whole goal of an introduction is to make the other person feel at ease with you, and rigidity is just the enemy of ease.
So, if we are completely abandoning this fragile house of cards and we are just throwing out the memorized monologues entirely, what replaces it? I mean, how do you actually survive an unpredictable conversation?
That's the million-dollar question.
Right. And the framework I like to use from our source material is what they call the +1 strategy. Instead of building a fragile house, you are dropping breadcrumbs. You are deliberately leaving a trail for the other person to follow.
I love the breadcrumb analogy because it shifts the entire paradigm from defensive speaking to generous speaking.
Generous speaking, I like that.
Yeah, because when you are nervous, you tend to view questions as interrogations, right? Someone asks a question, you provide the factual answer, and you just stop talking, desperately hoping you survive the interaction.
But in doing so, you essentially create a conversational dead end.
Precisely. Think about the classic inevitable follow-up question. Where are you from? The factual survival mode answer is simply, "I'm from Mexico."
And while that is, a true statement, it places this enormous social burden on the person you're talking to.
It really does. It is like playing a game of catch where you catch the ball and just immediately put it in your pocket.
Yes. The other person is just left standing there, scrambling to come up with another question just to keep the interaction alive.
And over time, that just gets exhausting for the listener. They feel like they're doing all the work.
This is where the +1 strategy completely changes everything. You take that exact same core fact, but you add one single deliberate breadcrumb. So you say, "I'm from Mexico, but I live in Madrid now."
The sociolinguistic mechanics of that one sentence are just beautiful. By adding that one single clause about Madrid, you have organically generated 3 or 4 brand new conversational doorways.
Well, the listener doesn't have to work hard anymore.
Exactly. They can naturally respond with, "Oh, why did you move to Spain?" Or "How did the two cities compare?" Or even, "Oh my gosh, I have a sister who lives in Madrid." You have provided a hook, and human beings are inherently curious creatures. We just love to bite on conversational hooks.
Let's push that hook analogy a little bit deeper, specifically looking at the power of the word "why." If we look at how, say, a university student might introduce themselves, they almost always default to raw data. I study business.
Again, very true, but incredibly dry.
Right. But if they use the +1 strategy and add a why, it transforms the whole thing. I study business because I want to start my own sustainable clothing company one day.
You have moved from a resume bullet point to a narrative. I study business is static data, but I want to start my own company is a story waiting to happen.
It has momentum.
It contains momentum, it has ambition, and it gives a really clear glimpse into your value system. When you share your why, you are actively inviting the other person to connect with your humanity, not just your demographic category.
But let me play devil's advocate here for a second, because navigating social boundaries in a foreign language is an absolute minefield.
Oh, it really is.
Where is the line between offering a generous conversational breadcrumb and completely oversharing? Like, if I'm a really anxious learner trying to provide my why, isn't there a huge risk that I end up basically trauma dumping on a complete stranger at a corporate mixer?
That is a very real fear.
I can easily imagine someone saying, I study business because my family lost everything in the recession and I desperately need to prove that I can rebuild our legacy. I mean, that is certainly a story, but it's going to make the other person choke on their appetizer.
That is a highly astute observation, and it really highlights exactly why the strategy is called +1. The boundary is contained right there in the quantity of information.
It's just one thing.
Exactly. The goal is to offer a small, positive, forward-looking detail. You are offering a glimpse, not a deep dive into your psyche. The phrase, because I want to start my own company, works so well because it is aspirational and, most importantly, it's brief.
So brevity is the safety net.
Right. The rule of thumb for learners is to add a maximum of one extra clause or one short sentence. If you are speaking completely uninterrupted for more than 30 seconds in the opening moments of an introduction, you are no longer dropping breadcrumbs. You are force-feeding them the whole loaf of bread.
The whole loaf. That's brilliant.
The breadcrumb is designed to be picked up. You actually have to stop talking so the other person can ask the follow-up question.
That distinction, aspirational versus deeply personal, is such a great filter. Now, assuming the conversation is flowing smoothly past those initial geographical origins, the inevitable next hurdle is professional identity. It's that classic, often terrifying question, what do you do?
Yes, the dreaded career question.
And I find from the source material that language learners really struggle with how to calibrate their answer based on their audience.
Well, honestly, the phrasing of the question itself is a major stumbling block for non-native speakers because it is semantically pretty bizarre.
It is when you think about it.
Translated directly into many other languages, what do you do? Sounds like a deeply philosophical inquiry into your current physical action. What do I do? Well, I breathe. I am standing right here talking to you.
Right. Like, what kind of question is that?
It takes time to internalize that in English, this specific phrase is the universally accepted idiom for what is your profession? Or how do you earn a living?
Once you finally decode that idiom, the challenge just becomes managing the flow of information. I really like to think of explaining your job like operating a manual camera lens.
Ooh, I like that visual.
Yeah, as the speaker, you possess total control over the focal length. You can zoom all the way out to this blurry, wide-angle landscape, or you can zoom all the way into a really sharp, high-definition macro shot. And the massive mistake people make is getting stuck on one focal length, regardless of who they are actually talking to.
That is a phenomenal way to conceptualize it because different social contexts demand entirely different levels of resolution. Let's analyze that wide-angle lens first. A learner might simply say, I work in education, or I'm in technology.
Which, honestly, feels almost too vague when you first say it. It feels like you are hiding something from them.
It does feel very counterintuitive, but that intentional vagueness is actually a highly sophisticated social tool. Imagine you are at a super noisy neighborhood barbecue. You are casually talking to a landscape architect or like a musician.
Someone totally outside your field.
Right. If you immediately launch into the high-definition reality of your job and say, I optimize back-end logistical algorithms for a mid-size B2B supply chain vendor, and their eyes are going to glaze over instantly.
We've completely lost them.
You have overwhelmed them with jargon that holds absolute zero relevance to their daily life. Saying, I work in tech is a wide-angle shot that just gives them the general flavor of your world. It allows them to nod along and feel socially competent without secretly needing a dictionary.
It basically protects the listener. Now, if the listener seems genuinely interested, or maybe if you are at a slightly more professional gathering, you adjust the lens, right? You twist it to medium focus. You say, I work as a software developer, or I'm a middle school teacher.
Exactly, because now you have provided a recognizable role. You have given them a concrete, universal archetype to grasp onto. Almost everyone on Earth has an idea of what a teacher or a developer does, which makes it just an excellent conversational middle ground.
And then finally, we have the macro lens.
Yeah.
You zoom all the way in. You say, I work as a senior full-stack developer specializing in educational software for autistic children.
But notice you deploy that macro lens only when you are speaking to a direct industry peer, someone you know intimately, or when the wide-angle conversation has organically progressed to a point where those specific details are actually warranted.
Right, you don't start there.
Never start there.
Yeah.
The camera lens analogy empowers the learner because it completely removes the pressure to explain their entire complex career in one single breath. You can start wide, safely test the waters, and zoom in only if the other person leans in.
We see this exact same tension with university students, too. The instinct is always to sound as academic and rigorous as humanly possible. So a learner will twist their tongue in knots, trying to say, I am currently majoring in the discipline of cognitive psychology.
It sounds so incredibly stiff.
It does, when in reality, the simple zoomed-out phrase, I'm studying psychology, is universally understood and vastly easier to pronounce confidently under pressure.
It goes right back to the concept of reducing cognitive load. I'm studying accomplishes the exact same communicative goal as I'm majoring in, but it frees up so much mental bandwidth for the student to focus on their body language, maintaining eye contact, and actually preparing for the next question.
But let's shift context a little bit, because there's one highly specific scenario where the wide-angle lens can completely backfire, and that is the job interview.
Ah, yes, a totally different arena.
When an interviewer leans across the desk and says, tell me about yourself, they are initiating a highly ritualized genre of communication.
The interview prompt is essentially a masterclass in reading between the lines. When a hiring manager asks you to tell them about yourself, they absolutely do not want to know where you went to middle school, how many pets you have, or that you are really into baking sourdough bread on the weekends.
Right, keep the sourdough to yourself.
Exactly. They are asking you to curate a highly specific timeline of your professional evolution. They really just want the highlight reel of your competence.
I've noticed that in these high-stakes professional settings, learners often equate fluency with utilizing the most obscure, difficult vocabulary possible. They think if they drop words like synergy and paradigm, they will instantly secure the job.
But it usually backfires.
Totally. It often results in a very choppy, robotic delivery. You get sentences like, I am a marketing employee. I execute many responsibilities. I desire professional growth. I seek a new position. Every single word is technically accurate, but it feels like a robot is reading its own source code out loud.
It completely lacks connective tissue. True linguistic proficiency is rarely demonstrated by the obscurity of your nouns. It is actually demonstrated by the fluidity of your transitions.
Connective tissue. I like that.
Let's look at how we can rebuild that exact same professional profile using basic elementary level vocabulary, but highly sophisticated organization. You might say, I work in marketing and I've been doing it for about 3 years. I really enjoy the creative process, but I'm ready to take on more leadership responsibilities, which is why I'm so excited about this role.
Wow. The difference is basically night and day.
Yeah.
And you didn't use a single word there that isn't taught in a standard beginner English class.
Exactly. The real magic lies in the conjunctions and the narrative flow. Using incredibly simple words like and, but, and, which is why creates this seamless bridge between your past experience, your current feelings, and your future ambitions.
It tells a complete story.
It does. It signals to the interviewer that you are not just reciting isolated facts off a resume, but that you have the cognitive flexibility to synthesize your life into a cohesive story. You are essentially demonstrating high-level communication skills using low-level vocabulary.
That phrase, connective tissue, is fascinating because it bridges us directly into the dreaded realm of grammar.
Oh, grammar, the ultimate boogeyman.
Right. Normally when you mention verb tenses to a language learner, you can practically see their blood pressure spike.
Oh.
But when we talk about location and timeline, where we are in the world and exactly how we got there, grammar completely ceases to be a sterile textbook exercise. It actually becomes a really vital storytelling tool.
This requires a profound philosophical shift in how we approach language education. So many learners view grammar as this horrible mathematical equation they are forced to solve just to avoid punishment from a teacher.
It feels like a test every time you speak.
It does. We really need to reframe grammar as a set of emotional and temporal filters. You don't learn the present perfect continuous tense because it happens to be in chapter 6 of your workbook. You learn it because you have an urgent human need to explain a complex truth about your own life journey.
Okay, let's ground this in reality for a second. Let's look at the nuances of location, because this is a perfect sandbox for seeing how grammar actively manipulates meaning. You have these fundamental phrases like, I'm from, and I live in.
Right, those are your geographical anchors. I'm from is your origin story. It points directly to your roots, your cultural DNA, while I live in is your current ongoing reality. They are both factual, highly stable statements, but life is rarely entirely stable, which is exactly where the storytelling grammar becomes so necessary.
Right, like what if you are a digital nomad, or you just relocated for a big job? You might say, I moved to London last year.
Notice what the simple past tense, just the word moved, does to the listener's focus. It isolates the action entirely. It places all the narrative weight on the specific historical event of the relocation. It basically says, look at this single thing that happened in the past.
But contrast that with the phrase, I've been living in London for a year.
The present perfect continuous. Just the name of the tense sounds intimidating, doesn't it?
It sounds like a medieval torture device, honestly.
It really does, but its function is deeply poetic. When you say, I have been living, you are actively refusing to leave the action in the past.
You're pulling it forward.
Exactly. You are telling the listener, this action started in the past, it is actively happening right now as we speak, and it will very likely continue. You aren't just stating a dry fact. You are describing a prolonged state of being. You are emphasizing the endurance and the journey of living in this new place.
It is the difference between just pointing to a static dot on a map versus literally drawing a line tracing your route. And you can inject so much personal flavor into this timeline. I love hearing learners use phrases like, I grew up in, or I'm originally from. Imagine someone saying, I grew up in a tiny village in the Alps, so I wasn't used to the noise when I first moved to New York City.
That sentence is a masterclass in self-introduction. In just one sentence, they have constructed a completely compelling character arc. They haven't just provided map coordinates. They have highlighted this profound contrast between their past environment and their present reality.
It creates instant intrigue.
It inherently implies personal growth, adaptability, and just a hint of vulnerability. It makes the listener instantly curious about their journey.
But here's the massive roadblock I see every single day. A learner will be standing at a party holding a drink, and they desperately want to share that exact story. But their brain completely freezes because they are suddenly paralyzed by what I call the fear of the red pen.
Oh, that is so common.
They are frantically debating internally. Wait, is it I have lived, or I lived, or I had been living? And the pursuit of this mathematical, grammatical perfection completely torpedoes the human connection they were just about to make.
The fear of the red pen is the ultimate enemy of fluency. We really have to separate linguistic competence, which is having perfect, flawless grammar, from communicative competence, which is simply the ability to transfer an idea from your brain into someone else's brain.
Those are two very different things.
Completely different. If you were at a party and you panic and say, I live in New York since 2 years, a grammar teacher will undoubtedly mark it with red ink. The tense is technically flawed, but the communication is 100% successful. The person standing across from you knows exactly what you mean.
They are going to call the grammar police and have you arrested on the spot.
Exactly. They're going to respond to the substance of your story, not the syntax. Learners must actively give themselves permission to be grammatically messy in the pursuit of genuine connection.
That's a great way to put it. Be messy.
Yes, because over time, through massive exposure to native speech, your brain will naturally refine the grammar. But you absolutely cannot wait for the grammar to be perfect before you start participating in the world. You have to use the grammar you currently possess as a blunt instrument to carve out a connection, rather than treating it like this tightrope you are terrified of falling off.
That is incredibly liberating for anyone listening. So we have established our logistical anchors. We can comfortably state our name with a good rhythm, manipulate our camera lens to explain our job, and use grammar to sketch our geographical timeline. But a person is obviously much more than their job in their hometown.
Definitely.
The next frontier is injecting actual breathing humanity into the conversation. How do we express our passions and our quirks without sounding entirely unnatural?
This is a highly delicate phase of an introduction because you are transitioning from objective facts directly to subjective identity, and almost instinctively, learners retreat right back to the safety of lists.
Oh, the dreaded hobby list. It's the bane of language teachers everywhere.
It is a pure defense mechanism because listing nouns doesn't require any complex syntax or tricky verb conjugations. So a learner will just stand there and flatly announce, "My hobbies are music, movies, sports, travel, and reading."
Whenever I hear that, my brain honestly immediately powers down. It is like walking into the Library of Congress and the librarian just looks at you and says, "We have books."
Right. Where do you even begin?
Exactly. Where do you even begin to parse that? It is so broad that it is virtually meaningless. It gives the listener absolutely zero surface area to grab onto.
It is overwhelming because it puts the entire burden squarely on the listener to guess which of those massive broad categories you actually want to discuss. The real antidote to the hobby list is a complete pivot from broad nouns to specific behaviors. And one of the most effective, highly natural phrases in the English language to accomplish this is, "I'm really into."
I'm really into. I love that. It is such a vibrant phrase. It doesn't just mean you participate in something. It actively implies enthusiasm and deep emotional investment.
It signals pure passion. So instead of delivering the laundry list of nouns, you select one single interest and you pair it with a highly specific behavioral detail. So instead of saying, "My hobby is cooking," you say, "I'm really into cooking. I spend most Sunday afternoons trying to master traditional Thai recipes."
The difference in conversational potential there is astronomical. You didn't just give them a topic, you literally painted a vivid mental picture of your Sunday afternoon.
You gave them a scene.
Right. You've given them a hyper-specific breadcrumb. Now, the listener has a flashing neon sign pointing directly to their next question. Oh, what is the hardest Thai dish you've made? Or where do you find your ingredients around here? You have essentially handed them a conversational script.
You are showing, not telling. And this concept of focusing on observable behavior is even more critical when we wade into the treacherous waters of describing personality traits.
Oh, this is fascinating.
Yeah, translating personality adjectives directly from your native language into English is fraught with immense cultural peril.
Wait, really? How does translating a simple adjective become a cultural minefield?
Because adjectives are almost never culturally neutral. They carry immense societal weight and subtext. Let's take the concept of confidence, for example. In many highly direct cultures, it is totally expected and rewarded to explicitly state your strengths. You might proudly announce in a meeting, "I am a very organized, efficient, and excellent manager."
And in your home culture, that signals competence.
Exactly. But if you directly translate that into English, particularly in British or American corporate cultures, it often lands as incredibly arrogant, boastful, and utterly lacking in self-awareness.
You sound like you were giving yourself an unprompted performance review.
Precisely. It really rubs people the wrong way. Conversely, let's look at an adjective like shy. In some Eastern cultures, describing yourself as shy or reserved is a beautiful way of communicating humility, respect for hierarchy, and thoughtfulness. It is an absolute virtue.
But in the West,
Right. In a Western business context, which heavily favors extroversion and assertiveness, labeling yourself as shy might accidentally signal to a manager that you lack leadership potential or initiative. You have inadvertently sabotaged yourself through a direct, literal translation.
so if adjectives are basically cultural traps waiting to spring, what is the evasion strategy?
The strategy is to completely abandon the adjectives altogether and strictly describe the underlying behavior. Let the listener deduce the adjective themselves.
Show, don't tell again.
Exactly. Let's look at the action-based approach. Instead of declaring, "I am an organized person," which, as we established, sounds boastful, you just state a fact about your workflow. You say, "I really enjoy planning out project timelines in advance to avoid last-minute stress."
That is brilliant. You have communicated the exact same professional traits of supreme organization, but because it is firmly grounded in an action, it is undeniable, it's objective, and it's entirely relatable. You aren't bragging at all, you're just casually describing your process.
Let's apply it to the shy example, too. Instead of branding yourself with a permanent, potentially negative label like "I am shy," you contextualize it as a temporary strategic behavior. You say, "I'm usually pretty quiet when I first join a new team because I really like to observe how everything works before I jump in."
That is a total masterstroke of reframing. You have taken what could be perceived as a weakness, shyness, and smoothly transformed it into a strategic, highly thoughtful observation period. You are implicitly telling your colleagues, do not misinterpret my silence as ignorance. It is actually a highly focused process of warming up.
And one of the most elegant examples of this reframing is how to handle extreme competence. Instead of trying to find the perfect English word that means I am highly skilled but also incredibly humble, which is nearly impossible to find, you focus entirely on curiosity. You say, I'm always interested in learning new things and tackling complex problems.
It is the ultimate display of professional modesty. It demonstrates immense adaptability and ambition without ever crossing that fine line into arrogance. It is just universally charming.
So now, if we step back and look at what we've built, we have amassed an incredibly powerful toolkit. We have the relaxed rhythm of our name. We have the breadcrumb strategy for our origins, the adjustable camera lens for our profession, the narrative timeline for our geography, and the action-based behavioral descriptions for our personality. We have all the modular puzzle pieces.
But having the pieces isn't enough, right? You have to actually know how to assemble them in real time under pressure. How do we synthesize all of this so we don't just stand there holding a bucket of linguistic Lego bricks?
The overarching, totally non-negotiable rule of assembly is that context is king. The whole idea of a perfect, universal self-introduction is a complete myth.
Doesn't exist.
It doesn't. The modules you select and the specific order in which you deploy them must be entirely dictated by who is standing right in front of you. Using the exact same script at a neighborhood barbecue that you use in a corporate boardroom is a massive social misstep.
Let's paint a picture of these contrasting environments to really nail this down. Imagine you were at a casual summer party in your new neighborhood. You have a plastic cup in your hand. There is loud music playing. You clearly aren't going to use your macro professional lens here. You might pull the location module and maybe a vulnerability module. You say, hey, I just moved to the area a few weeks ago and I am completely lost on where to find decent takeout. I'm trying to figure out what people actually do for fun around here.
That introduction is highly, highly calibrated for the environment. It is open, it is slightly self-deprecating, and it practically demands that people engage with you and offer recommendations. It builds immediate, genuine rapport.
Right, it fits the vibe perfectly.
Now contrast that exact same person walking into a corporate kickoff meeting on Monday morning. They are sitting at a massive mahogany conference table. That neighborhood barbecue intro would be disastrous.
I'm looking for takeout.
Yeah.
Not great.
Right. Instead, they pull the professional medium lens module and the forward-looking module. They say, hi, everyone. I'm joining the marketing team to focus on digital outreach, and I'm really looking forward to collaborating with all of you on the upcoming launch.
The environment completely dictates the architecture of the introduction. And speaking of selecting modules, there is a major cultural hurdle from the source text that trips up a lot of learners, which we can call the age and family rule.
This is a classic example of pragmatic interference from a native language. In many cultures around the world, establishing your exact age, your marital status, and your family lineage is the absolute fundamental bedrock of social orientation.
It dictates everything.
It dictates the level of respect, the formality, and even the grammatical pronouns you will use. So learners instinctively and understandably translate this habit directly into English. They will walk up to a total stranger at a bus stop and say, hello, my name is Jen, I am 34 years old, I am married, and I have 2 brothers.
And in English, especially in North America or the UK, offering that level of demographic data totally unprompted to a stranger feels incredibly jarring. It honestly feels like you are reading them your tax return.
Exactly. In English-speaking cultures, that demographic information is generally considered fairly private and totally unnecessary in an initial greeting unless it is directly, specifically relevant to the context of the conversation, or if someone explicitly asks. You do not need to list your siblings to establish your identity.
Though I will say there was one fantastic exception to the family rule in the text that always makes me laugh. You might not mention your brothers, but if your entire life revolves around your golden retriever and you spend literally every weekend hiking with this dog, by all means, bring the dog into the introduction early on. People absolutely love talking about pets.
Pets are the ultimate conversational breadcrumb, but the underlying principle remains true. Curate your data based on relevance, not habit. And to manage this curation without totally panicking, learners need a solid mental framework. You do not prepare sentences, you prepare concepts. You internalize what I like to call the core pillars of identity.
Let's define those pillars clearly, so our listeners have a concrete checklist to work from. The pillars are Name, country of origin, current location, work or study focus, one specific interest, and one future goal.
Yes. If you build a fluid, comfortable understanding of those 6 pillars, you possess supreme conversational flexibility. Because they aren't memorized in a strict linear sequence, they are just tools hanging in a tool belt.
You can mix and match.
Exactly. If you mention your country and the other person immediately interrupts you with a 10-minute story about their amazing vacation to your hometown, your house of cards does not fall down. You just smile, engage enthusiastically with their story, and when the conversational ball finally comes back to you, you seamlessly reach into your tool belt and just pull out the work pillar or the interest pillar.
Let's trace what this evolution of flexibility actually sounds like in the real world. Let's invent a hypothetical language learner. We will call her Anna. She recently moved from Brazil to New York to study. If we carefully listen to the progression of her introduction over time, it is basically like watching a time-lapse video of cognitive adaptation. Let's look at what we might call the raw survival stage.
Okay, in the initial survival stage, Anna's introduction is entirely functional. It sounds just like this. Hi, I'm Anna. I'm from Brazil. I live in New York now. I'm a student. I study business. I like reading and movies.
It is choppy. It is a staccato list of isolated dry facts. The grammar is extremely basic. But, and this is a massive but, it's an absolute triumph of communication. If a learner can only produce this today, they should celebrate it. She successfully transferred her core pillars directly into the mind of the listener.
It is the foundation. You have to start there. Now, as Anna gains exposure and her working memory capacity expands, she begins to integrate that connective tissue we talked about. Her introduction evolves into a much more natural, fluid state. She might say, "Hi, I'm Anna. I'm originally from Brazil, but I live in New York now. I'm studying business at the university. In my free time, I really enjoy reading, especially historical fiction, and I love watching movies with my friends."
The leap in sophistication there is just incredible. She deployed the originally from timeline nuance. She smoothly connected her 2 locations with a simple but. She used the camera lens to specify her studies, and she totally abandoned the hobby list in favor of specific breadcrumbs, historical fiction, and watching with friends.
The ideas are no longer isolated islands, right? They are a connected landmass. Finally, as Anna reaches a stage of high fluency and complete conversational comfort, her introduction becomes this dynamic, identity-rich narrative.
Let's hear the final form.
It might sound like this. Hey, I'm Anna. I'm originally from Brazil, but I've been living in New York for about 2 years now. I'm studying business, and I'm really hoping to transition into marketing tech after I graduate. Outside of classes, I'm super into books and movies, but honestly, I'm mostly just trying to explore different neighborhoods because I feel like there's still so much of the city I haven't seen.
Wow, that is just beautiful communication. She seamlessly integrated the present perfect continuous tense to show the duration of her time in New York. She added a forward-looking future goal about marketing tech. She's the super into behavioral phrase, but honestly, my favorite part is the ending.
The vulnerability at the end.
Yes. She dropped a highly relatable, slightly vulnerable breadcrumb about wanting to explore the city, which is basically an open invitation for the listener to offer advice or share their own favorite hidden spots. It is a masterpiece of social engineering.
It really is. But we must issue a very crucial warning to our listeners right here. Do not try to force yourself into that final, highly complex stage on day 1.
You will crash and burn.
You absolutely will. Fluency is an organic byproduct of time and practice. You earn the ability to deliver that complex narrative by willingly and awkwardly stumbling through the choppy survival stage 100 times. If you try to sprint before you can walk, you will instantly trigger the cognitive overload we discussed at the very beginning.
Embrace the choppiness. Now, we've spent this entire deep dive focusing heavily on how you project your own identity. But an introduction is inherently a two-way street. If you deliver your beautifully crafted modular introduction, drop a perfect breadcrumb, and then just cross your arms and stare at the other person in absolute silence, well, it is going to be excruciatingly awkward.
Which brings us to the vital, concluding half of this entire equation, flipping the script. The true art of asking back. True conversational momentum relies on the psychological principle of reciprocity. You have to actively demonstrate genuine curiosity about the complex, three-dimensional human being standing in front of you.
And just like there are dead-end answers, there are totally dead-end questions. If Anna finds out the other person also works in business and she simply asks, "Do you like business?" she has effectively killed the momentum.
A closed question that elicits a simple yes or no, forces the entire conversation to a grinding halt. You have to continually restart the engine. The goal is to ask open-ended questions that serve as brand new doorways for the other person.
So instead of asking if they like their job, you ask, what made you choose a career in business? Or maybe, how did you originally get into your field?
By asking how or what made you, you are handing them the exact same narrative opportunity you just utilized. You are inviting them to tell a story, to share their deep motivations, and to reveal their own why. You are validating their identity. And when both people are generously trading stories and eagerly picking up each other's breadcrumbs, the anxiety of speaking a foreign language completely dissolves, replaced by the genuine pleasure of human connection.
We have covered a massive expanse of psychological, linguistic, and cultural terrain today. So I want to distill this entire philosophy into a truly actionable summary for the listeners tuning in. Your homework today is not to go to your desk and write a new, more complicated script.
Please don't do that.
Exactly. Your homework is to take a piece of paper and write down the simple answers to your core pillars in the simplest English possible. Name, location, timeline, zoomed out job. One specific behavioral interest, just the raw materials. Then, while you are washing the dishes or driving to work, just practice connecting 2 or 3 of those pillars out loud using simple words like and, but, and because. Practice dropping just one breadcrumb. And most importantly, prepare 2 open-ended questions you can use to flip the script. My final piece of advice is to radically redefine your concept of confidence. True confidence in a second language does not magically appear when you finally memorize the entire dictionary or master the subjunctive mood. Confidence is simply the residue of repetition. It comes from doing very simple modular things many, many times over. Do not wait in the shadows for your English to become perfect before you start having conversations. The messy, imperfect, terrifying conversations are the exact forge where your English will finally be perfected. The conversations are the classroom.
Oh.
I absolutely love that. And to leave you with a provocative thought to mull over as you go about your day, think deeply about the psychological process we just spent the last hour dissecting. Selecting specific modules, carefully choosing which focal length to use for your career, deciding exactly how to behaviorally frame your personality traits, filtering out your native cultural biases. When you learn to dynamically and fluidly introduce yourself in a new language, using these flexible tools rather than strict word-for-word translations from your native tongue, are you simply repeating historical facts from your past? Or are you actually actively constructing a completely new version of yourself? Are you building a second language persona that gets to consciously, deliberately choose exactly how this new world sees you? Speaking a new language isn't just a utilitarian exercise in translating vocabulary. It is a rare, profound opportunity to completely redefine who you are.
It really is the ultimate blank slate.
It truly is. So the next time you're holding that lukewarm cup of coffee and you feel that familiar panic rising in your chest, the next time you feel like you've completely forgotten how to walk in this new language, just remember, don't try to sprint. Don't try to build a towering house of cards. Just take one single modular step. Drop one generous breadcrumb and just see where the path takes you.